And getting back to that historic agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim spoke right after the announcement of the peace deal with State Department official David Schenker, who oversees Mideast diplomacy. And they discussed this deal's historic significance.
Joined on this historic day in Washington by Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, David Schenker. What does the U.S. get out of this partnership between Israel and the UAE?
Well, we get to see two of our critical allies in the region starting to work together in a more overt way. As you know, we got the Emirates and the Israelis together here in Washington last summer for a tripartite meeting and talked about strategic issues and areas of potential cooperation. I think that the Emirates and the Israelis see great potential for cooperation moving forward on a broad range of issues, and the United States will benefit from that undoubtedly.
You said at a conference around a month ago that you would wish that Israel would hold off on applying sovereignty to parts of Judea and Samaria, annexing the West Bank, depending on your terminology. Who knew what when at that point in time? What was going on a month ago? Was this in the works? Was this accelerated at the time you made those comments, or did this come together within the last couple of days?
Well, let me first say and clarify that I said that Israel would have to take into account the impact on developing relations with states in the region that this might have, the extension of Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank. There was no threat, there was no warning, but obviously, by delaying or giving away the potential for extending sovereignty right now, Israel got something very big. Israel has signed its last peace treaty 26 years ago with an Arab partner, Jordan, and that has been very productive, I think, for both Israel and for Jordan. Likewise, the Camp David Accords in '78, there was great benefit, but we haven't seen, I think, in both of those cases, the type of normalization and integration that we had hoped in terms of a people level or overt economic cooperation or otherwise. And so, but now, with the Emirates, I think that type of cooperation may be possible. And I think also one of the benefits of this, being the first state in the Gulf to openly sign on to this type of normalization with Israel, that it may, open the floodgates to other states saying, hey, this is something that could benefit us as well. We can move beyond this very quiet type of relationship we have with Israel to a more overt and productive relationship economically and strategically.
Two particular entities are weakened by this agreement, and obviously they're on different levels in terms of threat and power, but we're talking about Iran and the Palestinians. Does today's measure change the dynamic? Does the U.S. think that either Iran or the Palestinians are both sensed that they are weakened by this agreement today and may either quietly or overtly come back to the table and start talking to the Americans again?
I think seeing this happen is something that is for Iran just a disaster. It really destroys, I think, their whole narrative. As for the Palestinians, I think that this too is a sign that that states will not be beholden in the region to Palestinian rejectionism of talks with Israel, of negotiations with Israel. This should be a clarion call for the Palestinians that it's time to start re-engaging, whether with the United States or with Israel directly, to talk about how you move forward productively within the context of the vision for peace, on finding a solution to a conflict that has served no one and that is going on far too long. So this is not what the Iranians will portray as abandonment of the Palestinian cause. I think that this should be, for the Palestinians, a realization that states are going to pursue their interests, that they are concerned about the plight of the Palestinians, but the Palestinians have agency, and they have to take steps to advance their interests, which I think necessarily means negotiating with Israel.
In that vein, the Trump vision for peace that was laid out at the beginning of this year always took into consideration that it would need backing from the Arab world to really have any chance of success. There was not much, at least overt support for the plan. There was some tepid support. Others came out firmly against it. Does this agreement today change that dynamic at all? And if so, where does that leave the Trump vision of peace for the Middle East, specifically between Israel and the Palestinian Authority? Is it still being worked on? Are there maps still being drawn out? Is there still a timeline for the application of sovereignty or the recognition of a Palestinian state? Where does that leave all that today?
We saw in the statement that the White House issued that the Israeli government has agreed not to extend sovereignty in the
For
West
now.
Bank. There was no end line on that in the statement, and I think that really was a major issue for the Emiratis. That Israel is not going to annex. But listen, I think the vision stands. The vision was always a starting point for negotiation. But this vision, I think everyone has to recognize that while the vision broke from all tradition in U.S. peacemaking paradigms, it was, I think, transformative or disruptive. It shook things up in a way that made this agreement with the Emiratis possible. And I think, once again, the Palestinians should take advantage. This is a starting point for dialogue. We know the Palestinians don't like the vision. Some Arab states may not appreciate fully the vision, but it is a starting point for negotiation. It still stands. And we look forward to the Palestinians starting to engage on this or any other basis.
A new day in the Middle East. David Schenker, the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to us.
Good talking to you.